That never gets old.
Why?
Well, hello, Steve Conley. What are you reading there?
Leon the Extraordinary, the hardcover. The
Yo, that's a fantastic looking tome you have there, Steve Conley.
It is.
Tell us more about it.
Well, tell you what. If you check out what's the URL? Where do we send people?
The internet. I don't know.
Go internet. Take
internet.com. You'll find all about Leon the Extraordinary. Scholastic Graphics.
Yeah.
Do you order it directly from Scholastic?
You can. Yeah. You can order it from what's the thing? Bookstore.org, Walmart online, Target online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm always a fan of supporting local bookstores.
Go right to Jamar's house and get it.
You might have to fight me though. and also, I'm really trying to push Target, as we're not in Target live yet, but it's online. So go to Target and order it and make them change their minds. Why don't you? Welcome. Thank you, Steve Conley. I appreciate that. Let me do my intros. Thank you so much. Welcome, you guys. Welcome all and sundry to your favorite pandemic podcast, Pencil to Pencil. Not Pencil I Pencil or Pencil to Pencil. I. Pencil to Pencil, where you get to hang out with expert cartoonists and watch them talk shop. And if you watch us live, you get to interact with us and be a part of the show. What a cool deal. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS, your internet best friend and safe space, and also Philadelphia's favorite son. I would be remiss if I did not introduce my co-host. This person is, I like to call the Master Chief Full Bird Colonel of comic illustration. That's right, Full Bird, Mike Manley. What's up, Mike Manley?
My goose is cooked.
That's right. What's up? How you doing?
I actually found a sketchbook I'll show in a minute, but go ahead and introduce our triad of hosts.
And also, and I think he hates when I do this, you know how to give everybody nicknames. That's just my thing. At this point, everybody has a nickname for me. He is the world heavyweight champion of webcomics, Stone Cold Steve Conley.
I don't know why you think I hate that. It is fantastic. It's fantastic.
You still need like an explosion and graffiti behind you.
And I'll form the foot.
Yeah, that's right. We need pyro. What's going on, Steve? What's new with you?
I'm battening down the hatches. There's another storm heading toward Florida where I'm at. So if you lose me midstream, it's not because I've stormed off because of the nickname Jamar's given me. It's just because I've lost power.
Oh, he has to go fight Triple H in the steel cage after this. That's what it is. So, well, thanks guys for being with us. We had a really fantastic show. For some of you who don't know, we go live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. unless we're on assignment, like a couple of weeks ago, because Steve and I were in Baltimore Comic-Con saving the world.
Breaking necks on assignment.
That's right. Yeah. Mission accomplished. And we had a Phantom Mania last week, which I thought that was really cool. Mike, you want to kind of do a recap on the Phantom episode?
Well, basically what we did is we had the American newspaper strip team with Tony DePaul, the writer, and my fellow Phantom artist, Jeff Weigel, who draws the Sunday. So we got to sort of compare notes about our experiences working on the oldest superhero, sort of the original superhero, the Phantom, who's been around, 87 years, I think, this year.
What?
87, yeah.
Wow.
Still wearing the same purple jumpsuit.
Does he have?
He lives in the jungle because,
Do they have wash and fold in the jungle?
I don't know. He gives it to the local tribe, and they're probably like fold and burn. It's like.
Well, I know, if you live in New York, especially in Midtown, wash and fold is essential. But maybe he's got like a Maytag in the skull cave. I don't know how.
I always just wonder how he weaved that, whatever it is, corduroy or whatever it is that he's wearing, in the middle of jungle. I mean, I think the first one was like his shorts have that sort of like pirate stripe. Like you could say, okay, those came from pirate pants, and maybe use some, berry dye to dye the
Oh, right.
whatever. Yeah,
The cowl, right.
right. Yeah, but you sort of wonder, like, did the first Phantom leave like a little template in the skull cave for the guy? Like, here's how you cut it. Cut it here. This is where the inseam is.
So like always shorts over pants. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. It's one of those things where like nobody ever really thinks about like how these guys started originally getting their costumes. Unless Captain Marvel was magic. So
right.
That's
interesting. And it was a really great. There was a really great fly on the wall episode. And I think that's some of the magic of pencil to pencil, when you can get these generations of cartoonists all in one spot to talk about stuff you're never going to hear in the streets.
Yeah.
Right.
That was great. That's a favorite episode so far.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Until tonight.
I did find a sketchbook, has some sketches in it, because unfortunately we've lost a couple. We were going to talk about it on the show in the beginning. We lost a couple fellow cartoonists this week. We lost Kevin O'Neill, and then just Jose Pacheco we just lost, or Carlos Pacheco. We just lost, I guess, today.
Yeah, I think it was either today or last night.
Yeah. And I did a fill-in issue when he on Superman while during his run, because I guess
about Kevin, right?
Yeah, and I met Kevin twice, I think. Once in England when I did UCAC back in like 1990,
wow.
And then once here in the States. And I found my sketchbook that has an original drawing of martial law.
Yeah, that's hot. Wow.
So yeah, the sketchbook has some pretty cool stuff in it. I got a really awesome thing drawing by Joe Sinnott.
Wow,
that's nice.
When I met Joe Sinnott years ago,
it's so even.
Yeah, I mean, his stuff is like, it's like a machine did it. It is so so perfect. I have we had Mark Schultz on a couple of months back.
I love it.
And it's funny. On the very next page, wasn't planned this way, drawing by Tom Yates.
Wow.
Well, that's great.
That's wild.
So this sketchbook's actually pretty old. It goes back into the 80s. I got another.
And I always marvel at people that can do really, really fantastic pencil sketches. Like, I feel like sometimes you can hide in the ink. Is that a Dan Klaus?
Dan Klaus, yeah.
So
Pre-Ghost World.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
And yeah, so I always forget to take my sketchbook with me to the shows. I always take, I'm always into it. Got a nice.
Wow.
Who's that?
Mignola.
Ray Mouser, I guess, when Mike was doing the.
Oh, wow. Yeah, look at that. That's fantastic.
That's strong.
And
nobody's going to show you Mignola sketches at the 7-Eleven.
A really awesome Garcia Lopez Batman.
Wow, look at that. Do you think, at this point, and maybe we could talk to David about this, if the act of still like sharing sketchbooks is a thing that happens at cons anymore? It seems like everybody's way too busy or doing commissions.
One of my favorite things in there is
wow.
Wow. What was great was watching him draw that. And watching Garcia Lopez draw his, and then I have a couple Mobius sketches, but here's this funny little one you did.
I love it.
So yeah, I have some that I can't show.
Right.
Family show.
That's right. This is a family program.
I have a very nice one in there by our former co-host, Mr. Blevins, but I cannot show that.
No, we'll have to sign a form or something.
Right.
Have to go to a Google form and fill out some stuff before we.
That'll be on Pencil to Pencil After Dark.
After dark. So, well, you know what? We have a fantastic guest tonight, and I think this is just going to move very nicely into introducing our guest. I'm going to put Steve Conley on the spot. Steve, why don't you tell us about our guest tonight, and then I'll bring him in.
Well, I know this is a guest that Jamar and Mike have wanted to have on the show since before I was part of it, when I was among the riffraff, as I think I was called.
You were just a zygote then, Steve.
But David Petersen is an amazing cartoonist, and he's one of my favorites. I think I somewhat awkwardly approached him at a convention at one point and said, "I like your work. I think you're awesome." Something along those lines. And his creation, Mouse Guard, is phenomenal. It is, I think, as someone who is sort of staked out their own territory. They're part of the Mouse Guard is available through Archaea as part of Boom, but it's got this history that he's basically been steering this ship in a way that I think is admirable and something you could look at as inspiration and maybe even study for how it could inform how you approach your own IP in self-publishing and in being a creator. So David Petersen, he's one of my favorites, and it's very exciting to have him here.
Well, as they used to say, enough said. So let's bring our boy in. Welcome to the podcast, David Petersen. Rendering. Look at that.
Thanks for having me. What an intro, Steve.
I know, right? That was fantastic. Thank you, Steve. You did a great job. David, thanks for being on the show. We were talking before we went live about how David and I have been dancing for like a year, and I think the stars always align and things happen when they need to. And here you are tonight. So let's have some fun.
Yeah.
And David, I wanted to start off by talking about the recent past, because you were at Baltimore Comic-Con, am I correct? And we're also friends on the socials. And you always post a picture of your booth. I don't know if you do a pre-booth. Are you one of those guys that does a pre-setup of their space before they go to the show?
No.
You've seen that before.
Yes.
Right?
I have. Well, I've done that when I've done that to like map out, especially back when I was doing San Diego's Artist Alley, where that's 4 feet of space. It's so limited.
It's tight.
You have to figure, like, if I'm packing this stuff in the suitcase, I got to figure out where it's going to go on the table, or it's not worth bringing. So I've done that, but it's not a full setup. It's just putting some masking tape down on a folding table and going, what can I fit here? Because that's going in the suitcase.
Right.
Yeah.
I've always been so gobsmacked by David's exhibition setup. It's always, I mean, obviously you're a professional, but it's always like really top-notch stuff, and it's an experience when you go to David's table. So maybe let's just, if that's a weird place to start, but maybe let's start there, about kind of like coming out of the pandemic and getting back to doing shows, and like how was that for you as another part of your year, and like kind of just that whole experience.
Last year, Baltimore was my first show back.
Mm-hmm.
And Julia and I took the pandemic very seriously. We were very isolated. Even when people were like, "Oh, it's okay now. You can come out. You can go to restaurants and stuff." We're like, "We're gonna just keep eating at home for a while."
Right.
And then Baltimore, last year I went to because the Nathans who run the show, Mark and Shelley, were so adamant about protocols that I was like, okay, I feel safe. I feel like if anybody's going to enforce protocols, not deal with any kind of shenanigans, it's going to be Mark and Shelley, and I feel good about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to like the compliments about my booth, especially at Baltimore, I cannot take anywhere near full credit. Part of that credit has to go to the Nathans, both because they're so generous with floor space.
Mhm.
You know, so many of us end up getting those 10 by 10 squares. Like we get a full booth.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that gives you a lot more canvas to kind of come up with creative decisions about how you're going to display stuff.
Mhm.
And then I had gotten a booth at Emerald City years ago. And when I signed up for that booth, the convention center reaches out to say, here's the extras that you can order from us. Do you want power? Do you want internet? Do you want extra furniture? Do you want chairs? Do you want tables? We have bar stools. We have this. And I was like, oh, actually, I've never done a booth before. I could probably have something behind me that could fill up space, and also I could store product up there instead of under the table. So I looked into some bookshelves, and it was frightfully expensive to rent them.
Yeah.
And Julia and I went, I think it's actually cheaper if we go out a day before, rent a car, go to IKEA, buy shelves that we assemble quick at the booth. And even though we would be giving the shelves away at the end of the show or just putting them near the trash and hoping somebody takes them home or something like that, it's still cheaper than renting them. So we did that. And then luckily in Seattle, somebody I know, I said, hey, do you want these shelves? Because, I know you. Do you want them when I'm done with them at the show? And they went, yeah. And then I'll bring them back for you the next year. And I'm like, well, no. If you're taking them home, they're going to be full of your stuff.
Right.
You don't need to unload everything. And they're like, no, it's fine. We'll keep your shelves and we'll bring them back every year. And so I haven't had to rebuy the shelves in Seattle. And then I wanted to do the same thing when Mark Nathan said, hey, I'm going to give you a 10 by 10 space. I was like, great, let's do the IKEA thing.
Yeah.
And then they went, we could use those shelves at the shop. We'll just take them back with us. And then next year we'll just bring them. So I show up to the Baltimore Comic-Con and I've got a 10 by 10 space with 2 IKEA shelves ready to go.
Well, that's fantastic.
And then the other credit goes to Julia. She really wanted to dress up and zhuzh up the look this year. So I think it looked even better this year than it has in years past. I was super skeptical when she got all these things that she was putting on our dining room table for, we're going to put out these little pumpkin things. Oh, we're going to put out these little lights. We're going to, that's a bunch of stuff that's just going to get in the way and fill up the suitcase.
Right.
And we got it set up and I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right. That looks way better.
Wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Funny, I remember one of the last times I did San Diego, I saw Kyle Baker at the end of the show. Because when you leave the show, it's like this long goodbye because then you suddenly see everybody.
Yeah.
You didn't see in the place.
Yeah.
And he had the screen, and what he did, because like you said, everything there, it's like, oh, you want a cup of water? That's $90, right? Everything is super expensive. He was going back to Staples or Best Buy to return a screen that he bought for the show and now is returning before he went. So I think a lot of people do that. They go, like you said, they buy something because it is cheaper.
Yeah.
And if you rent your shelf, it's probably like $200 or $300.
Yes. Yeah. It was half the cost to rent a car for a day to go to IKEA in a town that I don't live in and get shelves, and then they go together quick. Yeah.
It's funny that we're talking about this, but not so much because it's one of those like hidden, like Disney behind the curtain things that we all go through. It's just like, trying to curate a suitcase for three nights before you get on an airplane is maddening.
I mean, we see that at the show. You'll see guys come in and they've got a couple containers and a suitcase, and then like they fold everything up, and then you sort of figure out, like, if you're an artist and you're not taking books, if you're taking originals, what fits in one big suitcase. And it can't be too heavy because then they charge you on the airplane.
Right. You get banged for that. Yeah.
Yeah. We try to fly with one airline consistently. That way we earn our status with that airline. Because of our status, we get 2 bags each at 70 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes, especially like when we go to Seattle, because that's far away from me, I'm in the Detroit area. I have a lot of stuff to bring for a booth. So we'll splurge and do a first class ticket for me, use the companion ticket that we've earned through our status to get the first class ticket for Julia. Now we each get an extra bag. So we get 6 bags total at 70 pounds each. And that way we can bring everything with us to Emerald City without having to ship anything.
That's so smart. The logistical nightmare of it all,
Yeah.
it can drive you insane.
There's games to play for how to cheat the system, how to rig the system.
Yeah.
Oh,
You have, I remember the last time I did San Diego as an exhibitor, I would do the stuff where I would ship it to Brett's house.
mhm.
He was in Arizona, and then we would drive over and then wheel everything in. And once Alberto Ruiz was crashing at our booth, he had something arrive late. He had it in the back, and they sent the thing to the booth. It was like $70 for like one box for the guy to come like 100 feet.
For the
Yeah.
uni guy to come on the floor, it's $100. Yeah.
That's another perk of putting it in suitcases, because when you're wheeling, even if you have to make 6 trips, every suitcase, no union guy's going to go like, hey, you can't manage that suitcase by yourself. That's a union job. It's like, yeah, it's a suitcase. Nobody's going to stop you.
This is funny. I missed the gate, like the loadout gate at Baltimore by 4 minutes at Baltimore a couple of weekends ago.
You're like running and sliding down as a gate.
No, I got caught in traffic, and I'm like around the corner from the Sheridan, and I'm like, good. I get there, but the dude's like, nope. So I had to park on the roof of the hotel, and then I had to schlep this stuff down.
You just should have kirked him.
Did you have a dolly or any kind of hand cart or anything?
I had to ask the Marianos for that. This is like one of those times where I don't usually have so much stuff, but I was debuting Leon, and I had boxes and boxes on boxes, and I was like, of course, this is what we're doing. I think I lost like 12 pounds that weekend.
Speaking of like tricks, we found, I can't remember where we bought them, but we found some, because there's those flat dollies that fold up and the wheels fold in.
Yeah.
But the little foot on that dolly is only like, that wide. So when you're carrying a box of books, it's real precarious. Mm-hmm. And we found like a flat hand truck kind of thing where the wheels do the same kind of, but it's 4 wheels and they all fold up kind of like the Back to the Future DeLorean, and the handle lays flat against it. And the whole thing's only about, you can't see, but yay thick. And it fits, the outer dimensions fit inside of our largest suitcase.
So you can put that in your luggage. Wow.
It's really heavy. Like, it adds a lot of weight. So you got to be careful about, do we need to bring it or not? But a couple times that saved my butt, where it's like, there's a hand cart. It's smaller than a regular hand cart, but it's totally manageable, and I can bring it in my suitcase.
Last thing we'll say about shipping is this is a weird podcast.
Welcome to Shipping to Shipping podcast.
I know people are taking notes furiously right now.
That's shipping to shipping. That's shipping.
That's why Steve does webcomics, because he has to ship nothing. Right?
Our buddy LG says UPS shipping for shows. Now, I'm sure some of you guys have hacked, like shipping stuff to the hotel, and I've done that in New York a couple of times. But it's always hair raising. Like, the stuff may show up, it may not show up, and you're stuck if something goes wrong.
Yeah. You also want to call ahead to the hotel and find out if they charge for receiving packages.
And then
I've had some hotels where they're no charge if it's 1 or 2 boxes, and then they charge something reasonable after that. But I had an experience in Chicago where I'm driving to Chicago, but I thought, it'll just be easier if I ship a bunch of boxes, and they nailed us. It was like $20 per box, and it was like, holy crap!
I had a $30 per box receiving fee in San Diego one year.
Yeah,
at the hotel, and that wasn't even getting it to the hall.
Right. Yeah, it's at the hotel. So hotel is great because there's always somebody there to pick it up, no matter, receive it no matter what time. But call ahead to your hotel and find out if they're going to charge you and how much and how many boxes. Tell them how many you're going to ship and all that stuff.
Well, that's really important, I think, for artists, because you might only do a couple shows a year, but if there are other people that do a lot of shows, and that's partially how they make their living. I know guys that make their living now going to shows, which means that you're shipping, or you got to have your, like you said, you got to have your rig really tight. because that's eating into your profit.
Yeah.
So I love it. Everybody loves a good setup. So speaking of that, like David, let's get into it. This is something we like to call on the podcast your origin story. Like that's so original, right?
The radiation.
That's the gamma rays. So maybe if you want to spend some time telling the audience about how you got into the business and maybe some, some stories from before you were pro and maybe any interesting things like that you'd like to share.
Sure. I mean, I wanted to draw comics when I was in high school. I was first inspired by the Ninja Turtles comics. I was reading some classic X-Men comics, the reprints that had the Art Adams covers. I was reading those, but for some reason it was seeing the Ninja Turtles books, especially because over the top of it, it said Eastman and Laird's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I would read those and they were so different. X-Men stories felt like the X-Men cartoons or the Spider-Man is Amazing Friends cartoons. Like it felt like it was part of this big Marvel machine that someone was cranking out. And that's not taking anything away from, Dave Cockrum or John Byrne or Chris Claremont, who were creating those issues. Like they were unique and original, but they felt part of this bigger machine. Whereas the Ninja Turtles comics, when I read those, I'm like, these are just two guys making this crap up. And then they're drawing it. And that appears to be a job. And I'd like that job. But yeah, throughout high school, I tried my best to imitate being all my favorites. Jim Lee and Chris Pacello and Joe Mad and Mike Mignola. But by the time I got to college, I just really kind of thought my work doesn't look enough like what popular comics are. No one's going to let me in this industry. My stuff looks like children's book illustrations. So I went through college kind of planning on trying to get children's book work or something like that. Maybe some role-playing game illustration work. And I went to after college, after getting married, I became friends with comic artist Jeremy Bastian, although he wasn't comic artist Jeremy Bastian then, of Curse Pirate Girl fame. He was just Jeremy Bastian art store employee. He was my dealer, getting me my pencils and pens.
Get that pinky, get that long pinky nail, right? Yeah.
You got any HB lead? And he said, you should set up a convention next to me sometime. And I was like, but I don't have a comic book. I don't think I should set up at a convention. He's like, oh, I haven't had a comic book. And I've been setting up for the last whatever it was. Like I've been setting up for 6 years and I don't have a comic. I'm like, well, what do you do? And he's like, I just take artwork. I sell some of the artwork, or I get commissions, or I put together a sketchbook once and I tried to sell that. And I'm like, okay, I think I could put together some prints and some original pieces. And so I did that, and I made my portfolio the worst possible kind of portfolio you can, the Swiss Army knife portfolio, where every page is a new version of, look what I can do. Look what I can do. Look, I can do watercolor. Ta-da, I can do ink work. It's superheroes. It's D&D characters. I can do it all. Please, please tell me you like one of these things.
That's fantastic.
And, it has no kind of concise message or vision as an artist. It's all over the place. But in there, I had some of these drawings for this idea that I had that I didn't know if it would be a comic. I didn't know if it would be an illustrated novel. I didn't know what it would be, called Mouse Guard. And I had these mouse drawings. And I just had them in there as samples to inspire somebody that if they wanted a commission from me, here's one of the other blades in my Swiss Army knife. And people started asking, when does that book come out? And I was like, no, there's no book. I'm new here. I'm just, would you like a commission? I could draw something like that for you. And after, I think the third person asked, when does that book come out, pointing to Mouse Guard work, I was like, I'm missing a trick here. So Motor City was Motor City Comic-Con in Novi, Michigan, and it ran every 6 months. This was the fall show of that year in 2004. And I said, my answer started being, I will have the first issue out at the next Motor City in May. And I just kind of gave myself that deadline. I'd had the benefit of working a little bit of pre-press on a print-on-demand comic that my former art history professor had put together. We had kept in contact, and he had said, hey, there's this place, it's called Comics Press, and you upload your files, and you can print 1 or 20 or 50 or 200 issues, and it's the same price per issue. So if you want to, it's really affordable, and I'm going to do it. And could you help me with some of the files and do some artwork? And so when I was telling people, yeah, I'm going to have the first issue of Mouse Guard, I already knew that I had a viable printing method because print on demand had suddenly become a thing. So yeah, I had never really drawn a full story of anything before. And I wrote and drew the first issue. The deal was black and white interiors, color cover. That was like the stock print on demand thing. So did the first issue. I went to that Motor City, rolled it out, sold out of all the copies that I printed for myself, which is I think about 100.
Yeah.
I also knew that I wanted to keep doing it. I wanted to do like an issue 2. So to help recover costs faster and hopefully be able to bank some money that would be the print bill for issue 2, I sold original pages dirt cheap for issue 1. I mean, I was okay. I was comfortable. I wasn't uncomfortable. But even now looking back, I'm like, that was too low even for me starting out. What the hell was I doing? They were going for like 40 to 50 bucks a page. It was dumb.
Well, Dave, I have questions.
Yeah.
I have so many questions. So, okay, it seems like even in this space that you have a pretty strong knowledge of how this stuff needs to work, right? So even like, oh, I'm going to sell these original pages to offset, other things, or I'm going to make this comic at this size format and X amount. Like, there didn't seem like there were any things that slipped you up too much. Like you didn't order 5,000 issue ones.
Right. Well, yeah. So some of those financial things, like knowing to sell pages to offset the next printing bill or not ordering too many, was just a fact of my wife and I were newly married. We had bought a house and we were comfortable. We didn't have like spare money to spend on printing, or like me getting a table at the convention was okay, we're budgeting for the fact that I'm buying this table. And then we have to sell stuff so that I can make, like, everything had to match up. Like whatever I'm selling at the convention has to pay off this table. If I come out in the red, I don't know that I'm ever setting up at a convention again, because we're just not in a position that we can, we were newlyweds. We just didn't have that kind of flexibility. So I was thinking the whole time about making sure I could do everything to try to make sure I never was in the red when it came to printing bills or convention setups or anything like that. I had worked retail enough also to kind of know how to do profit margins. So I knew that what a store pays for something is half or less than half of what it actually sells for to the final customer. So I had that kind of built in for knowing what my print costs were and then what I could get away with charging for a single issue. So yeah, I knew that stuff, but some of the other stuff where you're like, oh wow, you had it all together. I was just too dumb to know that I should have been worried about some things.
Oh man, I know how that feels.
I'm interested in the fact that you gave yourself a timeline and you had never done. Had you done short stories first, or this is just like you just decided I'm going to make a Thanksgiving dinner? I've never done it. I've never made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but now I'm going to make this big.
I'm buying seeds. Deal. I'm buying seeds to grow grapes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start making wine. I'm buying seeds for the grapes now.
Right, because that shoots a lot of young artists down.
Yeah,
having to do. People can get enthusiastic for 5 pages.
Yeah.
They like, and then having the whole story. So how did you work out? I'm interested in your origin process of laying out your story and pacing yourself so that you could complete the book, because a lot of people just they start and they get to that first hump or two,
Yeah.
and then that's it.
So in terms of experience, I had all throughout high school, I had my best friend and I, we wanted to draw comics together. Together, he and I created about 30 original IPs. And that's not an exaggeration. We've actually done we did a video podcast series called the Plot Masters Project. We called ourselves the Plot Masters back in high school because that's how good we thought we were. And we wouldn't just go like, hey, we want to draw the Ninja Turtles or we want to draw the X-Men. We did that, but we'd go, what if we did a mutant animal story? What if we did a superhero story? So we had all these things that we wanted to do comics for. And I was that young person who got really enthusiastic and started penciling pages and got 5 pages into a longer story and ran out of steam. I mean, I was also a high school kid who then, for whatever, had finals or, hey, there goes a girl, or we're going to play a role-playing game this weekend. Stop what you're doing.
Right.
I was distracted. I never got anywhere. But some of it was also I ran out of steam. In college, that art history professor had me do a short, 4-page story for the publication he was doing that I helped him with some of the pre-press on.
Mm-hmm.
So I had done that as a short, but that was the only thing I had ever done that was finished, where I had a beginning, a middle, and an end to the story. And I actually got all the way done with it and could say, there, that's the product, or I'm not still tweaking it. I'm not still working on it. Well, it's not as good as it could be. I went, there it is. That's it. But it was 4 pages. Mm-hmm. So with Mouse Guard, some of the impetus was I had just promised a bunch of people that I was going to have an issue done. So I can't run out of steam. The other thing was that best friend, I was working at an antique store. That best friend was working at a coffee shop, and he and I had a phone call while we were both at work. I called him at his job, or he called me at mine. I can't remember. And he said, we both have to figure something else out for the art stuff, because we can't be doing coffee and antiques when we're in our 40s. And I was still in my 20s, but it just kind of hit me like, yeah, you know what? Nobody's going to come to this antique store and go, David, we want you to draw comics. David, we've heard about your terrible sales technique for antiques. We want you to illustrate this children's book. So I was like, I have to get through this. I have to do it.
And we'll make a cup of coffee.
Yeah. And Jesse will make you some coffee. I'll maybe sell you. I'll tell you maybe why you shouldn't buy an antique. I was a terrible salesman. So my process with starting out was I wrote an outline for what needed to happen in the issue. Mm-hmm. I think I started trying to write some dialogue or some meaningful text. And then I was like, this is too dense. I think I'm going to use it like the opening crawl in Star Wars. And I'll put it on the inside front cover. That's just like to prime everybody of what the issue is about. And I had heard, listening to lots of comic artists talk about young artists' failures, that the biggest thing that young artists need to focus on is storytelling. And that storytelling, the easiest way to break that down, they would say, is, does the story work if all the words are gone? If all the words and balloons are gone, can you still follow what's happening, what the emotions are? And I thought, that's good advice. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to give myself the words to use as a crutch. I'm just going to have an outline of this happens, then this happens, then that happens, then this happens. Mm-hmm. I didn't have page numbers next to them. I printed out that it wasn't even an outline. It was really just a bullet list. Here's the order in which things happen. Mm-hmm. And then I would put, once I had it printed out, I'd type it up, but then have it printed out. I'd put little tick marks in pencil next to each thing going, I think that would take me 4 pages. Let's see. Mm-hmm. And I was guessing, like I didn't really know, but I just kind of pasted out that way. And then I would draw pages, just making it visual. No real words, no nothing. It's why my first book is really Spartan on dialogue, probably to a fault, because I would put the words in after.
I like to call that pizza math. Okay, so there's 5 people coming over. How many slices does Eddie eat? Okay, how many pizzas do? It's like kind of like backtracking from the back of it. Yeah.
And then you have to leave, if you're not writing the dialogue to start with, you still have to leave room in case you wanted to write the dialogue. So did you have to redraw things? Because
no, No, some of my panels were kind of open anyways. I was a printmaking major in college, and so I was trying to get these. One of the reasons that the book is square is I liked having these kind of big horizontal panels that had meaning. If you have a traditional comic page and you put it a horizontal establishing shot, it's so tiny. It's just it's a thin little slice of the page. It doesn't have that, like, I wanted like a David Lean, impact. I want it to be like this cool establishing shot from Dr. Zhivago or something. So I knew I wanted some space and some room. And then I also like Japanese woodblock prints that are about nature and would leave lots of kind of breathing room. So just naturally, my panels all had enough breathing room that I didn't have trouble fitting word balloons in. And like I said, I was writing a little sparse too.
Was that first book, was it comic book formatted, or were you already going to square?
No. This is what became the first chapter of Fall. So issue 1, I did as the self-published thing. It was black and white, and then, it was a flimsy issue.
So you were working in chunks, and you wrote it all out, and then you were working in chunks, like you'd finish 4 pages, 3 pages, kind of a thing. Or did you go all the way through and then all the way with the inks?
I can't remember, but I definitely work on the pages in chunks. I never was one of those people that do like all the pencils and then go back to page 1 and start inking and go all the way through and then go back and do lettering. That felt like I was having to do the issue 3 times. So instead I would do a scene or something or whatever I was excited about. If I got to a point where I want to get some ink on that page, that's a good time to stop because I'm excited about it. So now's the time to ink it. So I'd ink that and then start back up with the next little set of scenes and pencil those, or maybe even just pencil a page and then ink that page and just kind of keep going along. And I think on that first issue, I added all the balloons and the text at the very end. I don't think I was adding it as I went.
Mm-hmm. And were you doing? Obviously, some of this was digital. What was your setup then?
Oh, just the balloons and text.
So were you doing that in Illustrator?
Photoshop.
Oh, you did in Photoshop. Okay.
Photoshop, probably Photoshop 5 or maybe I might have been up to 7 at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And I had a not very big scanner. So the first page of Mouse Guard that I ever drew is actually page 2 in the issue. I don't know why, but that's what I drew first. And I knew that it was going to be this square book, and I could buy 14 by 17 inch pads. So I just trimmed it down to be 14 by 14, and I drew the page. And it took a lot of work to fill up that space, which I learned that by doing that page. But then when it came time to scan, my scanner was small enough. I had to do it in 4 quadrants and then stitch it back together before there were all kinds of Photoshop magic trickery to make that easy. And then I was like, I think I should do pages a little smaller than this. I think I should do pages that fit on my scanner.
Was there a point where I'm sure later you were like, I need a bigger scanner, or did you kind of teach yourself into just drawing a smaller size? Because I know some people got stuck.
I went to the page size that I went to right after that first page is what I'm still doing now. The outer, like the paper size is 12 by 12, and then I measure a ½ inch in on each side for my outer gutter, my outer margin. And that first scanner still couldn't get the whole, like just a little bit of it would get that kind of like gray blur. So I didn't have too many splash panels or splash pages in that first issue. So I could scan it in parts,
right?
And just make sure that the seam was right in a gutter and I wouldn't have a problem.
Now, I'm sort of interested in what the origin of the idea and why you decided mice. Was there something that, like you're a fan of The Secret of Nim, or were you a fan of those kinds of books or stories where you have the anthropomorphic animals as opposed to humans?
Yeah, I've always loved talking animal stories, and just kind of like I remember a friend in high school pointing out, like, you really like things where humans aren't in them. And it didn't have to be anthropomorphic characters, but like The Dark Crystal or Wizard of Oz, like where there's a scarecrow and a man made out of tin and a lion as a character. Or there were just lots of things like, or animation with like Nightmare Before Christmas, you know, like if you saw or the Muppets, like you see a real human in it and you seem to have some kind of aversion to that. I don't think it was an aversion, but I definitely like the other stuff more. But yeah, talking animal stories, Wind in the Willows, Aesop's Fables, those were some favorites of mine. Back in high school, when I was a plot master, I had come up with a medieval animal thing that was probably a lot closer to Disney's Robin Hood, where the characters were much more human anthropomorphized. There was a bigger diversity of species, and those species were roughly human proportions and different height. Like the bear was taller than the fox, but the same difference
Right.
a tall human and a shorter human would have. And that's what Mouse Guard kind of grew out of. That eventually in college, I thought maybe if I was going to do this as a children's book, I would play up some of the more like Aesop's Fables. They'd be actual animals instead of anthropomorphized. And then if I did that, how am I going to keep all these? I could treat it like Tolkien treats different races. Like I could treat every species that would have its own culture, its own architecture style, its own language. And I had that ambition for a minute and then went, holy crap. That's a lot of world building. But the reason I stopped it or kind of hesitated the most was, how do you keep smaller characters involved in the story? You know, if you have a party and there's a fox and a ferret and a mouse, how do you keep the mouse alive in the story? You can come up with some, plot reason why they can't eat the mouse. They have to keep the mouse alive till the end of the story. But it's like, that's going to wear thin quick.
Right.
Where it still becomes believable. So I was like, man, how would a civilization of mice, like a whole society of mice or rabbits or something like that, how would they survive when they're prey animals? And I just started designing this world of mice they design their houses so that their whole cities, so they're kind of deep and hidden away and even spread apart from one another. So that if one of them does get breached, it doesn't wipe out the whole civilization and this and this. And I'm like, wait, how do they get between here and here out in the open country? And I was like, there's this patrol, this group that's kind of like a mix between Tolkien's Rangers and the Boy Scouts and they're mice and they're called the Mouse Guard. And it all just kind of came out right there. And I was like, I don't need the other animals. The other animals are the backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares about the plight of the fox when we've seen the plight of the mouse.
I love it.
That's great.
Now, when you I don't want to like slow up the episode because we're so fascinated on this stuff. But just thinking about the comic book industry that you inserted yourself into, right? Because one of the things that I love about our stories a lot, that they always start with a risky move or you jumping off the cliff metaphorically or something like that. And you created that deadline for yourself by, I got to get this book done for Motor City Con. Right. And then once you're in it, once you won't go through that door, now you're inside and you got to, did you feel like that? Or did you feel
I probably felt like that. I think even a year later, looking back, I could go, the stakes were low. You know, if I fell flat on my face, 100 people at Motor City might know about it. Mm-hmm. That's it. The bigger leap was, so that the first issue that I self-published, the black and white one, came out in May of 2005. In July of 2005, I was going to San Diego, not to set up, just to walk around, just to be a patron of the San Diego Comic Convention. It was my first time ever going. Yeah, I was actually going because there had been a big push with all the fans on the Hellboy forums over on Comic Book Resources. We were all going to do a big Hellboy forum fan meetup and take a picture. And I was like, I'm going to go to that. And those people had been very supportive. Those people had known about Mouse Guard. And so I stuck a couple copies in my messenger bag so that I could even hand some out to some of those people as thank you for their encouragement. And I bumped into a guy who's unfortunately no longer with us, Bill Baker. He was a comics journalist, and
I remember Bill. Yeah.
historian. Yeah.
Hmm.
Very animated head movements when he'd talk. I always thought he was kind of like a Muppet, like Guy Smiley. His head really got moving when he'd talk. He's hilarious, sweet man. I owe so much of my career to him, really, because he knew me from Michigan, and at Motor City, and then he saw me at just wandering aisles at San Diego, and he said, "I know why you're here. You're gonna find a publisher for Mouse Guard. That's what you're doing." Like it was some big, like I was up to sneaky stuff. He had figured me out, and I'm like, "No, Bill, I'm here to be at the San Diego Comic Convention." No, by the way, who wants Mouse Guard? It's a square book about mice. Which publisher? And I started pointing to all the banners, like Dark Horse, Marvel. You think DC? You think one of them is ready for a square book about mice? They'd laugh me out of their booth. And he said, "Well, you should try it. Well, maybe not them, but there are lots of smaller independent publishers that might be great for you, like Archaea." And I was like, "What's an Archaea?"
Really, the first one out of his mouth?
Yeah. He said Archaea, and I said, "What? I don't know what that is." And he said, "It's Mark Smiley's company." And that meant something to me because I had met Mark Smiley at a Chicago convention, again, where I was just a patron walking around. And I knew Mark because I had seen some of his work in role-playing books.
Hmm.
And I had gone up to him at that Chicago convention and shown him a portfolio, and he'd been super helpful. A really great review. And I don't mean that means he was positive about it. It means he gave me really good feedback and actionable things that I could fix.
Hmm.
And I took up a lot of his time blocking, potential customers. And it was the first time I'd ever shown anybody my work professionally. And he was just great. And I walked away, and about 20 minutes later, I realized I didn't write any of the things down because he had given me some very specific things to look up and reference. And I was like, "Oh crap, I didn't write any of that stuff down." So I went back. Luckily, nobody was at his table. And I said, could I trouble you? I need to write some of that stuff down that you were talking about. And he said, "Yeah, no problem." And he spent, again, as much time as he spent with me the first time, he spent with me again. And I wrote it all down. So I knew Mark, when Bill Baker goes, "You got to show it to Archaea. You got to go show it to Mark Smiley." I go, "Okay, well, I trust Mark. He's not going to want to publish Mouse Guard. Nobody's going to want to publish this thing. But Mark is going to tell me how to make my next issue better," because I hadn't started drawing issue 2 yet.
Hmm.
I'm like, he's going to give me that same kind of great feedback he did on my portfolio, and it's going to be terrific. And I went up and saw him. He had started Archaea to self-publish his own book that he had gotten the rights back on. He had done it at Sirius, stopped, gotten the rights back, set up Archaea so that he could self-publish, met up with a childhood friend of his who was going to be a financial backer and kind of the accounting guy, so that they could open the doors of Archaea a little wider and bring in a few more creators.
Mm.
And I showed him Mouse Guard, and he went, "Great, I want to publish this." And this is where the leap happens, where I think I was too stupid to realize how stupid I was being.
Mm.
So he goes, "Well, how many issues? Is this a series?" It goes on, right? Obviously, yeah, I want to do more issues, but I don't have an answer.
Right.
Like, I don't have a good answer. I haven't thought about this. And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a series. How many issues in the first arc?" And I just did some quick math. I'm like, 4. No, 4 is probably not enough to resolve anything. I'll just say 6. 6. Like, that just went through my head, like 4.
No, dials turning, yeah.
And I just went 6, like confident as hell. 6. And he goes, "Okay, would you want to keep the square format?" And I thought, here's where we're done. This is goodbye. And I said, "Yes, I would." And he went, "That's the right answer." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I got real ballsy, and I liked how my front cover looked, and I just didn't like the idea of putting a logo on it, like a publisher logo. And I said, "Do you think, because of the way I kind of have this like cinematic look on the front, if we could," I do wraparound covers for my issues, so the back is all artwork too. "Could we put your publisher logo on the back if we make a deal and not have it on the front cover?" And he went, "Yeah, I don't see why that would be a problem." And I was like, again, like, I'm too stupid to realize what a dumb thing that is to tell the publisher who just said, "I want to publish your book." But I didn't have real answers. I fudged my way through some of that stuff. he asked for a little bit of a plot synopsis, and I made some stuff up. And I think by a month later, we had a fully executed contract that was so creator friendly that I still have publishers now going, I can't believe you have such a sweetheart deal with Archaea. So
That's great.
That's fantastic.
How long did it take you to complete that first issue from start to finish, would you say?
I probably started later on. So October was when that Motor City was, where I promised everybody. I probably didn't start drawing the issue or working on it until late 2004, maybe not even until the beginning of 2005. So a couple months, because I had to have it in a month before the May convention. So probably 3-4 months to figure out how the hell to write and draw an issue of a comic.
And were you doing
The day job?
the day job, but or were you also doing like you have to do your world building? So were you world building as you drew it, or did you take time to actually design the characters and this is kind of what I want the city to look like, or did you just kind of do it on the page as you did it?
I did it on the page as I did it for them. Like I had ideas about what I wanted to do, but I would keep those in my back pocket instead of fleshing them out. So Jesse, the friend of mine, my fellow plot master, when we would play role-playing games together, man, he would tell me like, "Oh, I'm making an adventure for D&D," and I'd go, "Great!" And he'd go, "I'm working on I'm working on the material so that we can play it soon." And then months would go by, and I go, "Are we ever going to play that campaign?" And he'd show me this stack of paper that would be, potentially like 1,000 years of history of the place that we're going to visit. And here are maps and here are floor plans. And it's like, yeah, but that's just a setting. I want to play the story. I want to be the characters doing things. So I took that as a little mental lesson of don't get yourself bogged down in doing floor plans and doing too much world building. Have a vague idea about what you want to do, but until it needs to come up in the story, don't start seriously thinking about it. And the first issue of Mouse Guard, actually, we don't see a settlement. We don't see a city at all. It's we start on a merchant carrying a cart full of grain, and then he takes a little nap and he kind of like opens an eye, and then there's an exclamation point panel. Then we meet our 3 main guard mice who say, "We're out here looking for a missing grain merchant." They discover that there's a snake. They have to hide inside of a tree. Then they come back out. They fight the snake. They find that the grain merchant's been eaten by the snake. And then there's a little bit of a hook for, but the grain merchant had this map on him that he's not supposed to have. And that's the hook into the next issue. But we never see a settlement. I can't remember if Gwendolyn, who's the matriarch of the Mouse Guard, I don't remember if she's mentioned or not, but it was like almost like the old game show, Name That Tune. Like, how many notes can you do this and still make it recognizable? Like, it's a first issue. It's a weird concept. I've got mice walking on their hind legs with swords talking to each other. I needed to get that concept and tone to the reader without bogging down about like, well, here's the map and here's how the guard was formed. And it's always run by a matriarch. And by the way, these are the paths. That's too much.
Yeah. Cause I find that's very interesting to me, because some people really do have to do all that before they can do the other part. They have to do the figuring out the world building, and then they can actually.
I mean, I have gone a little crazy with model building now, where I do a lot of world building, actual literal world building that are modular with magnets and stuff, because I actually find that I design locations better when they're 3-dimensional rather than trying to do it on paper.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
But the first time I ever drew that location, that's Gwendolyn's office, the matriarch's office. First time I ever drew it, I just drew it. I think it was even based on a photo. But then when I realized I needed the other side of the room, at some point I made a quick little cardboard model. And then another point I did more, but I mean, I definitely go in depth on world building. There's a ton of world building in Mouse Guard. It's probably the panel topic. If it's not like a let's talk to David Petersen panel, it's usually I'm being invited to be on a world building panel. There is a lot of it, but I'm very careful that I never want to overwhelm the reader. It's always when the story goes there, that's when I need to start doing the hard work for the world building.
Did you ever get stumped by a fan who asked you a question you didn't know the answer to about world building? Kind of like, well, what happens here? Or
Yes.
What? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And sometimes my answer is just like, we already have them walking on their hind legs and holding weapons. Like, it's not real. Because they'll start going like, well, but in nature, this happens, or in nature, we don't have mice with that fur color, or how would they build this, or how would the strength of their rope work here? Or why wouldn't Kenzie's staff just break if it's a twig that's smaller than your finger? And I'm like,
yeah,
it's a comic book. Let's have some fun.
Because rats don't have opposable thumbs, so it's
Right.
like how do you even hold the sword?
And my mice have like Nightcrawler, Ninja Turtle style fingers, because for some reason, when I first started drawing them when I was in college, I thought that mice had 3 fingers, which is one of the stupidest things ever. So I've just continued drawing them that way. It's one of the ways that I can very easily, if I ever have like a kind of a copyright contest kind of a thing that I have to go after somebody on, where I'm like, you guys are too close to Mouse Guard. It's look at the hands, like, because I can't there's lots of things out there with mice with cloaks. Is it a Mouse Guard homage? Is it a Rats of Nim homage? Is it a Redwall homage? Is it a Mice Templar homage? There's lots of things. You start seeing the people with the mice with the 3 fingers, and I go, that's me. You can't get too close to me.
The 3 fingers with the white gloves with the little lines in the back.
David, we have a question from our buddy James from YouTube. James says, did any particular antiques from your old job wind up inside the books?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is just yes. There was a cast iron thing we were selling as like a garden ornament, but I think it was like a decorative spire on top of a roof. And I used that on an interior, like a front cover illustration that went. I kept up the thing where I put a block of text like the opening crawl to Star Wars before every issue on the inside cover, and I do a little spot illustration of some character that's prominently featured. So issue 4 of Fall definitely has that iron spire that I remember taking a photo of. There's a city called Barkstone that's inside of a locust tree, and that was the locust tree right outside the back of the store. Some of the earth had eroded away and left pretty big root that kind of twisted and turned, and it had rotted so that it was kind of this, if you did a slice, it would be this little cup shape. And I was like, oh, that's a little walkway right up to the hole that's in the base of the tree, which is exactly the way it was, just outside. So I, sometimes I'm photographing stuff in the shop while I'm there to put in stained glass windows or sometimes it was just inspiration rather than a direct item lift. That spire was definitely a direct lift. And then the tree right out back is Barkstone.
I love it. Well, David, do you want to show some art? Because I know people are champing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can.
All right, cool.
Go through the slideshow. You asked me. I just put a bunch of stuff in just in case when we were talking about stuff, any of it came up. I could.
Okay. Or we could stop and start. So I'm going to share the screen now.
I'm also interested to know that you make yourself a model sheet of your characters to start with, because one of the things that happens when you start drawing a character, by the time you've drawn them 50 times, they probably start to change a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's actually something that I tell young artists who want to do storytelling. And I go, I don't care if you're doing 8 pages or 10 pages or a 20-page story for your first thing. Don't wait until you're ready to start drawing it, because you're never going to be ready.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to do a drawing and then go, well, I'm not drawing the character consistently enough. Well, obviously there's limits to that. If you can't recognize the character panel to panel, yeah, you need to practice drawing the character more. But if the idea is the character looks at a little different on page 1 than they look on page 20, that's the game. That's exactly what all of us do, and we're going to start making little shortcuts. My books don't look the same from page 1 to the last page of the issue on any of my books. It's continued to change, so that's natural. But no model sheets. I mean, the earliest characters you see here, Saxon, Kenzie, and Rand, are really easy. It was just about keeping track of their fur color and their cloak color, and that Saxon's cloak kind of ties, you can barely see it, but it ties like a little neckerchief, like a little Boy Scout neckerchief. And then Saxon has a nick in one ear and Liam has a nick in the other. And I just kept having to look back at how I had drawn it on the page before.
Right.
To make it
Well, also,
now I know it by heart, but back then I had to check myself.
One of the things that happens too is that you draw your characters with different expressions that you've never drawn before. So I'm wondering after you'd done a couple issues, did you put together a model sheet, or did you say, okay, I like the way I drew his face or the eyes here, or I like the way I was able to get a certain amount of expression here that then you could sort of carry forward?
I would just look back at things that had worked in previous panels, or even the things that didn't make it onto the finished page in a sketchbook if it was too far. I definitely wanted these guys to look a little bit more realistic than anthropomorphized. I gave them these tiny eyes and just did subtle changes to their eye shape and all about body language to try to convey things. In the early issues, you rarely ever even see their mouths open. Because it's always kind of that like top down, or you slight an angle and their mouth would actually be like underneath their chin, or down by their chin. You can't really see it. So occasionally I'd have them tilted where you'd see a mouth, but a lot of times no. So I don't have a lot of control. I don't have eyebrows, like actual eyebrows. I have the brow, but I don't have that line. I can change the shape of the eye, how big that black dot is or what shape that black dot is because of the brow, but I don't have an eyebrow. I don't have that line to be able to arch or make angry. I could do some facial wrinkles, but I don't have a mouth. I don't have eyebrows. And it was just subtle stuff. And it was what worked. And then also in my sketchbook, if I went, that's too cartoony, that's starting to look like it's Disney animation or something like that. It's nothing wrong with that. That's just not what I'm going for. And it's too different from panel 2 to panel 3 if I do that change.
I love it.
So this is, you can see there's an evolution right there. This is the cover of the first hardcover. And this is the cover to my latest issue.
What are the years there?
2000 and probably early 2007, maybe late 2006. I can't remember when I had to get the cover done for the hardcover, but somewhere around there. And 2020.
Wow.
Or 2021, something like that. Yeah.
So
yeah, very, very different.
David, let me ask you some tech questions. So kind of from where we started in the early aughts to kind of, obviously we all level up. Did you find different changes in your workflow that, obviously started doing it one way and figuring out the shape of your pages, but kind of like, going direct to scans? Are you doing things digitally? Were you like leaning into Photoshop probably too much at one point and then kind of pulling out a little bit? Anything like that?
There were definitely, so I remember, just because I didn't have access to a lot of stuff when I was starting out.
Yeah.
I was putting more pencil on the page. Now I pencil everything. I pencil individual panels on sheets of paper and even elements from panels. I might draw a whole background. It's almost like animation. I'll draw a whole background or most of a background. I'll scan that in. I'll kind of resize it in the panel digitally, just for layout purposes. And then I might even print that back out now that I've got it resized. And on a light pad, I'll put down another sheet of paper and I'll draw a character or two or whatever I need. And I can keep adding more paper, almost like digitally adding layers, but I'm doing it physically. And then I scan it all back in. I like the feel of pencil on a page, or on paper rather than doing digital drawing. So I get all that the way I want it, and then I print it out just on regular copy paper. I tape it onto the back of a piece of Strathmore Bristol, and I ink it on the board, which means that almost none of my pages have any pencil on them at all, which less to erase, less to screw up. And then when people buy the originals, they're like, oh my gosh, these are so clean. They're pristine. You're like, yep. Every now and then you'll see something where as I'm inking it, I go, oh, I got that wrong. Let me do a quick correction, and I'll pencil it in, and then I'll ink, and then maybe I don't get all the pencil erased up as well as I could. Every now and then you'll find a trace of pencil on my page. But
so do you feel like your finishes are precious? Like you don't want white out on them or anything like that? Do you feel like with you?
I would prefer not to, but it's more just about the hassle
than
it is about the like. I mean, I guess there's a little bit of like, oh, this page might sell better, or it looks nicer if it's pristine. But I'm not like precious about that. It's more just like, oh man, now I got to get my Doc Martin liquid white out. Maybe it's already dry. Gonna have to reconstitute it with some water. And oh, do I even have a brush? Oh my gosh, all my brushes have hardened ink or hardened whiteout in them. I got to go rinse my brushes.
Right, it's a drag.
Yeah, it's a stupid hassle because it's not that big of a deal, and I should rinse out my brushes and take care of my art supplies. But yeah.
So, and also with that technical question, I wondered if there's any parts in your archives where it's like, oh man, I lean too heavy on the lens flare there, JJ Abrams.
Mouse guard, when I was teaching myself any kind of digital coloring, yes, there's really old stuff of mine when I first started doing some digital art that's crazy lens flare and filters to blur or distort things that looks really bad. But with mouse guard, no, I mean, I think it's just the quality got better. I don't think that there's the leaning too hard on something. Actually, I would say was a lesson that I needed to lean in harder to the things that I was reluctant to lean into. I just kept thinking like I'm supposed to draw. Like you'd watch other artists, you'd watch that video that Stan Lee and John Buscema did that went along with how to draw comics, and John's just drawing on the page and erasing and just making masterpieces right there in front of you. You're supposed to be so confident and good as an artist, you can just do that. And I'd be like, I draw something that's crap, and then I erase it enough times, my paper's damaged. And I'd want to like do tracings on a light pad of other drawings, or sometimes of architectural details, or I'd want to make a model, or I'd go, that's just taking time away from just drawing and doing the work. Except what I ended up finding out, because I kept thinking that doing those things was like not a luxury. It was a waste of time. It was a personal, I like doing this, so that's why I want to do it. You want to go play with Lego, or you want to go play with cardboard and glue instead of drawing pages. This is this is more personal. But what I find is when I try to just draw it from scratch, it would either take me longer or it wouldn't look as good. And I was like, if I just lean into the stuff that I actually feel comfortable with and gets me the best results, I'll streamline the process of that too, and that'll get faster. And so, yeah, I do all kinds of model building. I do all kinds of light box work to trace my pencils or resize my pencils. There are times where I'm even inking a page and I realize like, oh my gosh, that mouse's head is so squat on the body. It's like I didn't do a neck. So I'll ink the body and then I'll untape the paper and I'll just slide it up a little, tape it back down, and it's like, it's kind of like working digital, except it's still analog. And
I think it's really, you touched on something that I think is really important, which is to lean into your process, right? Because one of the things I love about this podcast is everybody's process is a little bit different. And we also have assumptions of other people's processes. So we assume that we must make our process like this other person's process. When actually, John Buscema, I have a bunch of them. he would do these amazing, super rough layouts for his pages, put those on the light box, boom, go over
Tighten
with
them
it.
up. Yeah.
Right. But when you see that video, you just think, oh, he's like God. He's just like ding, perfect, and you don't see the process.
I also like whenever I do when I'm at a convention and I sign a book for someone, I have this little stock mouse doodle, and it's all muscle memory. It looks great, and I do it with no pencil. I just I sign my name with the Sharpie, and then I do the boop boop boop, and there's a little mouse. And people are amazed. I can even kind of like look up and away or make eye contact with them as I'm doing it. And they're like, how are you doing that? And I'm like, it's all a trick. If you asked me to draw the mouse facing that direction, I can't do it without getting the pencil out and sketching that whole thing out. So yeah, I think probably John was in that video was doing his not easiest, but his go-to confident. I know this works. But yeah, I think leaning into your process, especially it's not just leaning into your process, it's leaning into the process that gets you the best results.
Right. Yeah.
If your process isn't getting you your best results, stop leaning as hard into it and start figuring something else out. Start like analyzing your own work in a way where you can figure out what's working, what's not, and to start making manageable goals of how to fix it.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting about your process is that it's your process for working on your project, which is different than your process of working, drawing Spider-Man, right? Because you're part of a chain, you're part of a team, and so your process on books like that might develop differently because you've got to make your pencils clean enough for somebody to ink, or you've got to ink somebody else's pencils.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to see an artist like you who starts out doing your own thing. It's sort of, I think of like Richard Corbin had a process where he built models. He lit stuff, he sculpted the things out of clay, but he wasn't working for anyone else. He was doing his own thing, which is very much like what you're doing there. You're doing your own project. So you're not saying, well, I got to hand it off to somebody else.
Right. Yeah. It would be, I would pity whoever would have to come in and try to figure out what I'm doing mid-process and then take it off like a baton. But yeah, I thought I was being I remember like I did the whole first book Fall wrong way. The first book Fall when I was working that day job, and it was about an hour away from me. So I had an hour in the car there and an hour on the way home, as well as working the full job. And when the hardcover came out, I had found out that the sales numbers were good enough. I mean, the issues were coming out and doing really well, lightning in a bottle kind of a thing. And I kept going like, can I quit my job yet? Can I quit my job yet? And Julia being responsible was like, it's not time yet. Like, I get that you could, but if this ended abruptly, we'd be kind of in trouble again. So you'd have to, and then you'd have to take time trying to find a job. So let's just keep the day job for now. When the pre-order numbers came in for the hardcover, it was like, okay, it's time to quit the job because now you have to promote the book. Because if these numbers can stay being these numbers, that's the thing. So I did that on the first book. And then after I quit the job, I remember being home and also kind of feeling like adrift. Like my schedule is different now. I'm not, what do I do during the day? Am I watching soap operas? Because I usually only work in the evenings when I get home from work. On one of the early issues, or the first issue of the second series, I had this architectural location that I wanted to draw, and I self-indulged and made this model that was way too, like I wasn't thinking about scale, way too tall. It was made of cardboard and Bristol board. And then I had stopped working on it, and I was sitting on the couch when Julia came in from her day job, and she was like, "Oh, is this what you've been doing today? Like you're watching whatever it was, Gilmore Girl? You're watching Gilmore Girls?" And I was like, no, wait, I've been productive. Bring up this monstrosity of cardboard and paper that looks like garbage to anyone who doesn't understand what it really is. And I'm like, no, I made this.
Here's my Devil's Tower sculpted out of mashed potatoes.
Yeah, well, it was better than mashed potatoes, but yeah. Well, you couldn't eat this, so I don't know. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It was. I wanted to do this. This location that was inside of a hollowed spruce tree. That I thought, well, if the inside is all hollowed, if the center of the trunk is all hollowed out, then they could do these like circular balcony rings, and then have little homes in there. And I was like, what if I designed it so that it was? What if Brian Froud designed the Ewok Village, and it was inside of this thing? But I'm like, I want to do this really dramatic, like looking up that shaft and having all these concentric circles, and then all the planks need to essentially go towards what would be the center point. And I'm like, that's going to be a nightmare to actually lay out all the perspective for. So I'll make this model, but I didn't make the full thing. I made like a third of the circle, and then I could rotate the model and photograph it again, and then Photoshop make it as round as I needed it to be. But yeah, so like it was a tool that really worked well for the issue. When you see the final drawing, you're like, oh, that's worth it. But when you just see this like monstrosity of cardboard and glue, you're like, that's what you did with your day. Great.
Well, you know what? I love that part of it, because it's another, like I just said, this is one of my favorite anonymous quotes. When you work from home, you're always working.
Yes.
Right. And we all get that. And I think the world is kind of understanding that since the lockdown. People understand how your day melts when you're home all day. But also that, like, working on a book isn't always with your hand touching paper. You know, it could just be thinking about it, or making reference, or
Sure.
Taking pictures of laying on the grass out back, taking pictures of it.
Right.
I haven't had to do this in a while, but my go-to inspiration spot was the shower. So I would go take showers without needing. I wouldn't need to take a shower, so I wouldn't lather up anything. I'm just standing in the hot water, like giving my brain a break to just think. And I'd have those eureka, like, I've come up with what the panel should look like, or I've come up with a piece of dialogue or whatever. And then you're sopping wet. And I'd yell to Julia to see if she could like bring up a pen and a paper and kind of hand it to me so I could scribble, or maybe and eventually we got shower crayons, or I could write on the tile. But if I got the idea early on in the shower, the steam, all of it would there go my ideas. They're just dripping down the wall.
And literally going down the drain.
Yeah. And I would get a China marker and a sheet of plexiglass that came out of like a frame, a cheap, frame from Target or something. And I would have that propped in the shower on the little wall where the shampoo and stuff goes. And I would write everything in China marker, because the water, you can put it right under the water. It doesn't rinse away. But I could write on that plexiglass, and I could write out all these notes. When I'd get out of the shower, I'd kind of tamp it dry with a towel, and then put a piece of white paper on it and put it on my scanner, and I could scan the whole thing. And then a little bit of toothpaste takes all that China marker right off, and I'd have a clean slate again. I haven't had to do that in a while. And we actually, the China, or the shower crayons are still in the shower in like a coffee mug. And I keep thinking, like, I don't use these anymore. I should find somebody who wants these, or just get rid of them. But
Yeah, the second you do, you'll have that really good idea.
I know. I'll be like,
Well, wasn't there? Was that the famous Hollywood writer? Was it Trumbo that used to write in the
oh yeah,
tub?
Over in the tub,
Trumbo, yeah.
Yeah,
And
he used to write in the bathtub. Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin, when he was on West Wing, he was a shower idea person, and he had, I can't remember what lot they were on when they were doing the West Wing stuff, but he paid to have them install a shower in his office. And he said he would, it's just the act of like stopping, getting disclothed, and going in the hot shower, and like just pausing for that moment would give him that break he needed. Just like some people, it's like just the act of like lighting a cigarette, or
right.
sitting back and taking the couple sips of the coffee. It was that thing, and he was like, I take 5 to 7 showers a day. None of them last more than a couple minutes. It's just idea breaks. But
Yeah, I think you touched on something really interesting, just, inside that space where I think most people just don't understand kind of how you live in this process 24/7, but also that you have understanding people around you who, help you rather than, make it more difficult for you. Our buddy D. Brad Gibson, what up, D. Brad? D. Brad says, do you have someone you bounce story ideas off of, David?
yeah. Julia's my first audience. And I bounce stuff off of her. She actually, when it comes to story, rarely has notes for me. But sometimes she'll say, well, what if you did this? What if you did that? And sometimes she'll get angry because sometimes when she makes suggestions, I'll do this like almost just hard no. Like, no, that's not going to work.
Right.
And she'll be like, why are you asking me then if everything I say is a no? And I'll be like, you're actually helping me figure out what I definitely don't want, which then, and it's not always necessarily her ideas, because sometimes I'll even go to her and I'll go, I could kind of go 2 ways with this. I could go A or B, and here's some of the things I like about A, and here's some of the things I like about B. And then she's like, well, I like B. And it's not even that she said B. It's just in saying them out loud to somebody else and describing them, I'm like, yeah, I really don't like B. A is the better option. And then just the fact that she happened to say B, then I go, no, it's not going to be B. She's like, geez, why bother asking me? And I'm like, well, it's this process that actually is helping me make what I think is going to be the better decision. And then there are times where I go the way she goes, where she says, I think this is the better choice. And I go, yeah, I think you're right.
You're hitting a ball against the wall, basically. Yeah.
And Jeremy Bastian also, he and I haven't had a story crunch session in a long time, but when I was working on this book, Fall, I had not done enough planning ahead. And when I got to that 6th issue and I needed to wrap everything up, he and I had lunch because I was like 2 pages in and I'm like, I just don't like how this is going in some of the direction. I don't want to do pages that I have to undo or redraw. So now is the time to start talking about this. And he and I we were both working in the same city at that point when I was working at the antique store. He was still dealing art supplies. And he was like, well, tell me, just verbally tell me what happens. And I started telling him, and he's like, well, this part of the story is dumb because you're moving away from the thing that everybody wants to see. And I'm like, but aren't I subverting expectations in that way, in a cool way? He's like, no, you're just showing everybody boring stuff. And I was like, okay, so I have to go that way, but that's a lot of hard stuff to draw. It was this army of mice has shown up at Lockhaven, the home of the Mouse Guard, to like conquer it. There's like a siege outside, and then there's 3 guard mice hidden that are also locked out now, that are gonna have to sneak inside. And I thought it'd be interesting to follow them, where for them it's the army is outside of the gates, and then by the time they get in, the gate is smashed, and we're seeing all the stuff that's gone wrong. And now it's this tension of like, oh my gosh, is everybody safe? And I thought that would be interesting. And he's like, you're drawing them going through a tunnel, like going through the secret passageway. And we don't actually see, everybody wants to see the bad mouse army smash through the gates and run through Lockhaven, run through the castle. We want to see that. And I'm like, but that's hard to draw. He's like, tough. That's the job. I don't ever hear from you that something's too hard to draw. And he was right. And he and I hatched out a bunch of other things. I had some other kind of issues about how to resolve some things that logistically I couldn't figure out how it would make sense within the story. And we hammered all that out. So Julia and Jeremy are probably the 2 that have done the most in that regard.
I have a question. Looking at these pieces that were the 2 covers, I know we've only gotten into 2 pieces of.
That's okay.
From the beginning, or at least looking at the first one and this one, you talked about being a one-person shop. You're coloring the line. Is that a printmaking background that is influencing your decision there?
No, and I wish I had an easy image that I could pull up. So when I drew the first issue as a black and white, I knew I wasn't going to do like halftone screens or anything like that to get the grays, but I wanted there to be this balance of not just I wasn't going to do a Frank Miller or a black and white Mike Mignola where it's this really stark contrast and play of shapes that leads your eye through. I wanted there to be grays, but I was going to achieve that with stippling and cross hatching, etc. But I was doing that knowing it was black and white, that first issue, because that's what I could afford. That was the deal. That was the print deal.
Right.
When Archaea said we want to do this in color, I started looking at some of those pages and going, I don't know how to color these without them looking bad, because I had crossed hatched, like I had drawn shapes of leaves where it's just the outer form of the leaf. I didn't draw the outline of them. I just did a crosshatch pattern, almost like a fill of crosshatching in the shape of a whole bunch of leaves. And in black and white, it pushes it way behind the characters. But when you color the characters, that black line all of a sudden is like way forward and slapping you in the face. And if I put color behind the black, now they're even darker and it's too much. And I was like, if I color those lines, I can soften that stuff up. And when I figured out how to do that on one of those early test pages of coloring mouse guard, I was like, and somebody told me in animation, it's called a color hold. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to use color holds. And I leaned into it hard. I started a little easy at first, like I'll do it here, I'll do it there. And now I'm like, oh, I can do it all over the place. like to make things sing in a way where it's going to make it all look better.
Right. And it's something impossible to describe to another colorist to get right.
Oh, totally. Like here on this one, the owl, like obviously the chest of the owl, that's all color held. That's all where I've painted the black ink work.
Right.
But actually all the line work on the owl, all the line work on the hut, that is all a color hold. That is all not black. That is a dark brown. And I play with that all the time to try to add lots of depth. In fact, that the house is a different color hold than the outline of the owl, which is a different color hold than the chest pattern.
Right.
I'll separate all those out so I can tweak them and kind of lighten this, darken that until I get that depth and visual distinction that I'm looking for. But yeah, that didn't come out of printmaking. It came out of how the hell do I color this artwork that was never meant to be colored.
I love it.
But it does have sort of a Japanese woodblock feel a little bit to it, with the way you have the layers.
Yeah, thank you.
Atmospheric layers, and their printing is, the lighter the further back you go, the lighter it would tend to get. And so I think you can bring, maybe even subconsciously, you're bringing that aesthetic in without thinking about it, but it's just part of your. It's like it's in there. That's
true.
Idea.
That's true. I definitely thought about it with as I was getting my ink line, the quality of my ink line, and kind of what I wanted to do with it, and the amount of cross hatching or texture or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is totally informed by carving wood blocks and or doing etchings. Because with etching, with both of those processes in printmaking, there's so much process in between your idea and the final image. You have to really know what you want you have to plan. I want this line to be like this texture or this width or this kind of, it's not just you draw it like on a pencil and you go, oh, I like that, or I don't like that. You have to plan for it. So you better be damn sure that's what you want. There was so much of that kind of planning and so much in those processes about how to get grays, how to get not just a stark black-white contrast. How do you achieve grays in both of those methods?
Yeah.
And, that totally informed my inking, and I was aware of it as I was kind of developing Mouse Guard and getting confident with my line work. But I didn't think about the coloring in that way. But you're right. It probably came in subconsciously.
I love it. And David, we've been talking for an hour and 34 minutes. Can you believe that? So
David, shut up. That's what you're really saying.
No. I mean, I know you have like a million slides on here, and I think and now the chat wants to ask questions. So I just want to know if you're okay with let's talk a couple more minutes.
Yeah. Let's do questions, whatever. I just put slides together in case things came up. I could easily go to like, oh, I have an example of that here. It wasn't like I had an agenda with these slides.
Right. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the whole movie process. that whole.
Well, it's getting late, guys.
Oh, look at the time.
Look at that, boy. We've been talking for an hour and a half.
Well, hold on.
I'm fine. The only I just worry that I feel like I've told everybody what's happened with it so many times. It's like, don't you guys already know? Nobody wants to hear this story again.
Well, David, hold that thought.
Yeah.
I want to get this one question in.
Okay.
And then we'll ask some more questions. We'll talk about movie stuff because I want to make sure that we connect all the tissue with the comic stuff.
And I can be, by the way, I can be here as long as you need me to. And if that means we do a part 2 sometime down the road, whenever you guys have a gap in the schedule, I'll be here.
I think we do need to do a part 2. Our good buddy Tim Fielder is an amazing cartoonist in his own right. Says a question for David and Steve Conley. There are times when I see folks build physical reference for environments. James Gurney is one who I admire greatly, but I wonder sometimes why would you redraw from a photo of your custom reference when you could just light and use the photo as the actual thing? Crazy idea. And I think Mike could speak to this too. Just doing stuff for his strips. Is that anybody want to get a start on that?
It's about consistency. I think if you had a whether it was illustrations or panel by panel comics, if you had always established the look that the characters are hand drawn, but the backgrounds are, specifically lit photos of models, you could totally do that. It would work. But if some of the panels have hand drawn stuff and some of them are photos of architecture and some of them are photos of models, it's just going to take the audience out of it. It needs to feel cohesive. The art in the panel needs to feel cohesive, unless the point is that it doesn't feel cohesive, like Roger Rabbit kind of thing. Like the whole point is he's an animated character in a real world. So if that's the look you're going for, you can totally do a story where that works, but you'd have to do it all the way through.
Yeah, and I think that using photo, in my experience, using photo swipe, as they would call it back in the old days, there's guys like Gene Colan who would do it, but it looked like a Gene Colan drawing. And when I was learning from Al Williamson, he would take photos, but then he would turn it into an Al Williamson drawing. And so it didn't feel like, oh, suddenly here's a photo of something, and then the next drawing is his drawing, because then it's like his world. So it's like to me, you're right. You want it to look consistent. If you decided like all the photographs are like a Ralph Bakshi animation where you are Xeroxing photographs for the backgrounds, okay, then it's very consistent, because what you're doing is you're creating like a magic spell.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, it's working here, it's working here. Whoa, that looks really, really different, and that's
one of the places that Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is so jarring.
Yeah.
Where it will go between very hand-drawn stuff, very rotoscope stuff, very photographed, but just contrast turned up. It's jarring when we go between those scenes.
Yeah, it has to go like through your brain and then down your hand, and then it's you, good or bad or different, but it will at least be consistent.
Yeah, I do a lot of, especially with the predator animals, I will use a lot of photo reference, and I will either light box and redraw in pencil and then ink those pencils so that there's 2 steps, so that by the end it looks like a David Petersen drawing and you don't see the photo anymore. Or I just think very conscientiously as I'm inking over a photo or part of a photo to go, I have to add all my kind of line texture. I have to exaggerate this eye. I have to exaggerate this fur texture, whatever it is, so that it looks like me and no one feels that separation between whatever's in the foreground and whatever's in the background.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I remember, I think I talked about this on the podcast before. Al showed me once when I was working on the Star Wars project, because he had this picture of one of the Admiral guys from the first Star Wars, and he had a photo of the guy, and then he used the projector to project it down on the sheet of paper, and then he drew over the projection, but it looked like an Al Williamson drawing. It didn't look like you were tracing the drawing, and there's a lot of things that you accept in the photograph, like the depth of field, the type of lens. Sometimes people's necks tend to be short in real life, but you don't pay any attention to that. But when you do it as a drawing, all of a sudden it's like, wow, that guy's head feels like too squat on his body. And so he showed me all these little things as he did it. And then you go, okay, I see how you can manipulate that. So it doesn't look like you just traced a photograph.
Because cartooning's better than real life. Yeah.
Well, Steve, did you want to add to that question?
Just that. I mean, I feel like if I'm making any reference, if I'm sculpting something, I'm a cartoonist who does a passable sculpts, and so I'll use those sculptures as reference for cartooning, but I'll always have to change it. My sculpture can't get to where my head wants it to be. You know, it's in some other place in here, and I do the sculpt to try to get close to it, and I use it as reference to understand a perspective on a character who, in my head, I can see it perfectly from 3 angles, but only those 3 angles. So I need to build a sculpt so I can see it from all the other 357 degrees. That's but once it gets on the paper, it has to be a cartoon. And so anyway, that's all I have.
There are all kinds of, like, if you were going to do a 3D model, like a digital 3D model, there are all kinds of shaders that can make it look like it's a drawing. There are some people who are good enough and know the software enough that it really does look like a drawing, but most of the time it looks like a CAD drawing. Like the lines are just way too clean compared to your own stuff. And I think that's great if you want to do that or use existing models, but then just ink over the top of it. Just a little bit of wiggle in your line or the little bit of texture.
See the heartbeat.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I have a question, David, and thanks, Tim. That was a great question. Kind of going back into your place in the comic book industry before we go, because everybody's kind of champing at the bit about this movie stuff.
Am I still allowed there? I haven't been kicked out yet.
Well, I think about, and I hate the phrase unicorns, because I think that's corny. But I think about outliers like Jeff Smith's Bone, even like Chadwick's Concrete or Cerebus, or and Mouse Guard and things like that. And when you came into the industry, there weren't a lot of hot books that were different than the superhero stuff. And I wonder, like, how was your introduction into the industry? Because you got your accolades, and a lot of people love what you were doing just because it was so different from everything else. Did you bring fans into the medium with you, or were you getting love from people who had never seen work like this before in comic books? What was your fan base like when you first got in?
It was a little bit of everybody. I even remember at early convention, I think like Motor City Convention, that first one or maybe the second one before the book came out nationally. Seeing somebody walk down the aisle and just kind of going like, well, that person is not going to stop at my table. Like I can just tell body, whatever it was, their clothing, who they, who they presented as, something that's like, that guy is into really hard edge, like horror or bloody stuff or whatever. He's not going to, and he'd stop and go, those mice are so adorable and cool. And I'd be like, wow, I'd never expected that person to stop at my table. And then there'd be a old lady where you're like, oh no, somebody's lost their grandkid and they're looking up and down the aisle. And then she'd stop and go, this is the most lovely comic I've ever seen. And you're like, that's wonderful. So I knew that there was some of that where I learned I couldn't anticipate my audience. And then once it came out nationally, there was a weird lightning in a bottle thing. I won't get into it all, but it was like, I acknowledge that I have some talent and I did a good job on that first issue when it was in color and everything. Like, you know, it's a pretty okay comic, but it got a lot more attention than a pretty okay response. And it was a lot of right place, right time, right moment. The Philip Sablick, who is, you know, now head of Boom, he was our Diamond rep for Archaea, and he decided to make Mouse Guard Gem of the Month just on seeing it. And that made a huge difference when we solicited the first issue. And it was all these little things that just added up. So the response was huge. I can't take any credit for it. I can take a tiny amount of credit for it. But the audience, what I remember getting was lots of guys who would come up and say, your comic is the only one I can get my girlfriend to read. I'm actually really glad I don't hear that anymore, because it means that we've reached a saturation point where there are enough women or wives, girlfriends or wives or whoever already going to the shop that the prototypical male comic book fan isn't having to beg them to go in. But I was that guy. I remember, you know, Julia and even girlfriends before, where you go to the comic shop and they wait in the car, or they even go like, can I just drop you off here and I'll be back in 20 minutes after some grocery shopping or something? You're like, well, just come in, there's cool stuff in here.
New Wolverine's out.
You just want nothing to do with it. So when guys are telling me like, I've been trying to get my girlfriend to read Bone, or I've been trying to get her to read this, or this, all these great titles that are very accessible and not the, you know, kind of overly machismo, you know, bullets and boobs kind of stuff. And they'd be begging their girlfriends or wives to read that stuff. And for whatever reason, Mouse Guard was the breakthrough on them. And so I guess I brought some people, but I think the bigger thing was I didn't exclude anybody.
Yeah, I love it.
No part of Mouse Guard that says you're not allowed to be here. This is not for you.
I think a lot of people fall down because they spend so much time worrying about this very small sliver of an audience that they bypass so many other people that may have really loved it. That's true. I have one more question, and then we'll get to the movie stuff.
And then movie? Okay.
And Wicked Goblin King was here before we turned the lights on. He was in the pre-chat.
Wicked Goblin King was in my stream on Twitch before your show started. I told people to come over, so he waited patiently when the lights were still off.
Well, I had to give him love because he waited patiently with it sitting on his hands. Have you ever thought about making a Mouse Guard novel the way Mignola and Chris Golden team up?
Not really. That came up kind of earlier. Actually, one of the first times, early days with Archaea, when there was some movie interest. I'll tie that back into the movie thing. But many generations of movie attempts ago, where it was, well, what about, you know, if we signed up with a studio, they're going to want to do novelizations, and how do you feel about novelizations? And I had just kind of fought my way past all the comparisons to Redwall. Like, Mouse Guard was finally recognized as its own thing and not just, oh, this is like Redwall, which is a young adult novel series by Brian Jakes featuring medieval mice. And there are lots of differences between our work. It's not, it's not the same thing at all, but there was just always that comparison. And at first it was really hard for me to not take that as some kind of an insult.
Sure.
And then start to realize, oh, it's a compliment. People love Redwall, and the people who love Redwall are telling me that my book reminds me of the thing they love. This is good news, but I've just kind of gotten past that. And then this, do you want to do novelizations, and how do we treat that? And I'm like, the part of the thing about what Mouse Guard is it's visual.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, suddenly I worry that we are getting too close to Redwall. So that's kind of where I've been with it. There was a point where I toyed with the idea of doing like an audio drama, and having it performed by different voice actors and actors that I know, like local theater actor kind of people. It just never really came together, and then I always still worried about the visual component. That's such a integral piece for me to not have that. Can Mouse Guard still stand up without it is my worry, I guess.
Wow, that's really interesting. As as we keep going further along with everything, the first thing people say is like, "Yo, this should be a cartoon." Yo, did anybody ever tell you this should be a cartoon or this should be a movie? You're like, great.
Because for the general audience,
Yeah.
they think, well, that's the ultimate. You made something, and Walt Disney wants to make a movie out of it. That means you're successful.
Jamar, you just delivered a hell of a keynote speech at the Ringos, and Mark Nathan tasked me with doing the inaugural one, which I think also meant, because nobody's screwed this up yet. Here, let's get the bad one out of the way first with David.
You did great.
But and I cribbed a lot of my speech from, elements of my speech from a talk that Ross Ritchie, who was head of Boom at the time, that Ross had given. Mm. And part of it was this idea of seeing different media types in this kind of pyramid, like food pyramid thing. And where is your place on that strata? And the apex of it was movies. And part of his message, and I elaborated on it for my keynote, was we need to stop that. Like, there are things that poetry can do that no other medium can do. And the epitome of what that poem is a poem. If you set it to music, you're going to ruin it. If you try to make it into a short story, you're going to ruin it. If you added illustrations, it's toast. Like, it gets to be the thing it is. Well, comics can be the thing they are. They don't need to transform into a animated picture or a live action movie or whatever to be as good as they can be. And at the time, you can actually go back and watch my speeches up on on YouTube. I said, we're about to make a Mouse Guard movie. And trust me, nobody wants to see Saxon, Kenzie, and Liam walk and talk more than I do. And instead, I want the movie to do all the wonderful things that movies are really good at. But it's not going to add or subtract from how good my comic is. My comic is my comic. And it's the best version of itself that it can ever be. So I was excited about the movie stuff. And there is that, like, you want it also from the marketing standpoint. There are all those people that think that's the epitome, or that's the only medium they really pay attention to. So suddenly they're going to be aware of my book series because, hey, there's a movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a really good team put together. It was at Fox, and Archaea had a first look deal with Fox. I had gone down a couple movie rabbit holes in the past and had gotten myself so burned out on the process, the pre-development and contract process, that there was a long time where Archaea would tell me, like, or somebody at Boom would tell me, hey, do you want to talk to this person about movie? And I'd go, no, I'm not interested. I want to work on my comic. Yeah. I wasted too much of my life talking to movie people. And just at some point, stars aligned where it was the right time, right place for me to talk to somebody at Fox when they had that first look deal. And I learned during those processes that it's really important to listen and not prompt them, because they'll go, well, we'd love to do Mouse Guard as a movie. What do you see Mouse Guard as a movie being like? And then you go, why? I think it could be like this. And is it animation or is it this? Well, I would like to see it stop motion, or I would like to see it like this. Whatever you say, they go, that sounds great. That is exactly what we want to do. Right? And you're giving them all the answers so that when you leave the meeting, you're like, they want to do all the things I want to do. No, they don't. They told you all the answers you want to hear. So I learned during that Fox one, I just sat there and I'm like, so what do you guys see the Mouse Guard movie as? And without prompting, they didn't know my answers. They started saying answers that were either completely in line or very close to in line with what I wanted to do. I was like, okay, I think we have something moving here. And we eventually made a deal, got Gary Whitta in to do the first draft of the screenplay. Gary, who wrote one of the drafts of Rogue One, was a writer on Rogue One. And Gary worked with me very closely. He was amazing about keeping me involved. And then they got a director in, Wes Ball, who was the director of the Maze Runner films. But Wes had kind of a different vision of where he wanted the story to go than what Gary had done. And Wes had worked with a screenwriter that he was very familiar with. So unfortunately, even though Gary's script was really good, Wes went with a different screenwriter who wrote also a really good script. It really was like either script we would have used would have been good.
Mhm.
Obviously, Wes was more invested with T.S. Nolan's. T.S. Nolan's it was a little faster, it was a little punchier. Gary's was probably, if it has a fault, it was too loyal to the source material. Like it picked up a bunch of my flaws too. You know, things that my book wasn't doing as well as it could. Because he was mirroring it so nicely, it had some of those things too. But it was a great script. And it was going to be motion capture, like the apes from Planet of the Apes. And we cast it, and we had Idris Elba and Andy Serkis and all sorts of folks involved. It was Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. And we got really close where they had done some proof of concept. We got the green light, and because Wes had worked with Giancarlo on some of the Maze Runner films, he called him his like lucky charm. He said, Giancarlo's part is really small. I think we could get him cleared in like 2 or 3 days. So he came in and filmed in the embarrassing motion capture suit. They had the kind of wires for where the ears go, just so that they were aware of their heads and where they were going to be. And they had cloaks on and foam weapons and everything. And Giancarlo filmed for like 2 or 3 days. And then we were supposed to all get together, the entire cast. I was going to have a cameo as like just a mouse in the tavern, raising my glass, going cheers. I had to get all the embarrassing measurements, find out I'm not going to look good in spandex with the dots on me. That was all set to go. And about a week before the cast was going to show up, the full cast was going to show up, Disney pulled the plug because Disney had purchased, by that point, the Disney deal had gone through. Disney had purchased Fox. And I never got like a definitive answer of why. There's some speculation that it had to do with the size of the budget, or, Disney couldn't handle another mouse in the house. Kind of, that's an easy headline to write. I think what it boils down to is Disney purchased Fox in part so that they could get rights back to characters for Marvel. But I think also to be able to start participating in profit from movies that Disney couldn't make. Fox can make an Aliens movie or a Predator movie or, dark, scary movie. Disney's never, even when they had Touchstone as kind of their other studio to put the weird things or the different things that they didn't want under the Disney label. Touchstone could only go so far in terms of it being dark or horror or specifically adult themed audiences. So by buying Fox, Fox's goal is to make the movies that Fox makes so that Disney can start getting the profit out of that stuff. And then the other thing is, if Disney's going to make a walking, talking mouse film, why are they going to invest all that money in somebody else's characters instead of just the thing that they're already doing, which even if critically we can say isn't working, financially it is for them. They can keep making remaking The Rescuers, remaking Disney's Robin Hood, remaking whichever one they want of their old stuff. And when they do that, it reinforces the brand. Even the ones that we say didn't work so well, I know Aladdin got a lot of criticism. Well, what happens when Aladdin comes out, not only do people my age who saw Aladdin in the theater when we were younger want to go see it again, want to see the remake, they take their kids and then they see it and they get disappointed and they go, when we get home, we're going to get on Apple TV or whatever. We're going to rent the original. I'm going to show you the original. So now Disney's getting the money for having rented or purchased the digital rights, or maybe it's Disney Plus at that point. They're benefiting because it's reinforcing their own brand. So why would they reinforce Mouse Guard where they're not going to get a cut of the book sales? It's not their IP. It's not represented in the parks. It doesn't help them. So the whole thing died. The rights are right now a little tangled up. Eventually they come back to me because there's a sequel clause where they had to make 2 movies within 7 years. Eventually they'll come back to me. Unfortunately, that means we probably have to start all the way over again, which stinks because I like the script we had. I like Wes's design choices. I like there's a whole world. There's a whole world of Mouse Guard that is locked up on a hard drive. That's a virtual 3D world. They had all the sets built. They had costumes, digital costumes. Everything was ready to start shooting.
When you started seeing the art, that must be kind of a trippy thing to see other people doing their best to bring forth what was in your head.
Yeah, the trippy part was how far away from what was in my head there were. And I knew that it was going to have to be a process. Walking, talking mice are a thing, and we wanted it. The studio and myself, we all agreed we wanted it to be what we call a 4-quadrant movie. You want men, women, old, and young, all to want to sit down and watch this movie. We don't want anybody to look at it and say that's for kids. And so if you did it exactly like my drawings, it might look a little bit too much like it's just for kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you make it too dark, now it looks like you can't take your kids to it. And we were trying to find this middle ground, and it meant and there was also limitations with the motion capture because you've got this range of motion that an actor is doing. But if the 3D model has, stunted arms or different proportions, that doesn't translate without a lot of extra programming. So we were trying to find this sweet spot, and the stuff that there's video. If you go out there and look on YouTube, you can find Mouse Guard canceled movie footage. It's not technically movie footage. It was a proof of concept to get the studio to give us the green light. It was we called it the sizzle reel. It was, here's all the things that are going to tell you what a Mouse Guard movie should feel like. But the mouse models that are there, like that whole thing was rendered on a video game engine. Those mouse models were temporary. Weta was going to be doing the actual mouse models, and we were still honing in on those proportions. What are the proportions of the hands to the arms? How long is the forearm? How long is this arm? How much of their leg is covered in fur? How much is it the skinny little, barefoot thing that I show? All of that was being figured out elsewhere, but the stuff that got shown, I think, still looks great. Probably not movie quality yet, but we were so damn close. And if you watch it just for the feel of the emotion of what that footage shows, spot on. Like it was surreal to see other people doing it because, like I said, the models were different enough from my stuff. I had to try to pull them back towards me. But with the other stuff, it's like, this is different, and yet it's exactly the same. You guys are hitting all the tonal notes perfectly.
Wow. Well, what a ride, right? And I'm sure there are people around you or who come up to you at the table that probably ask you things about like how heartbroken you are, or like is this the end of your story now, David? Because, right. Like they put a knife in your back and now you're going to quit doing everything. How do you combat people who ask you questions like that?
I try to tell them I'm still working on the next book. I feel like a lot tried to artistically kill me there kill my career for a bit there. There was, all kinds of upheaval here in the U.S. Whether it was politics or pandemics. My mom had Parkinson's and went from living in an assisted living place where I could check in a couple times a week to she was here living in our house full time, where I had to schedule bathroom breaks for myself because she could not be left alone for more than 5-10 minutes. Wow. And then the movie stuff dies, and it's like, man, is anybody ever going to give me an emotional break where I can work on my book again and feel good about it? So for most people, they're like, well, the book series is done. The movie got canceled. The book series is done. He hasn't put anything out in a long time. But I'm still working on the next book. In fact, I have some slide. I've done some new stories that are short stories because those were things that I could manage to fit in. But I've been working on somewhere here. I've been working on new pages for this big epic, the next big arc that's called the Weasel War of 1149. And it's taking me forever, and I do a whole lot of start-stop on it. But I try to remind people I'm still working on the next book. It's just going slow, and I have to have because it's going so slow, I have to have enough of it done that when we start publishing it, it'll never catch up to my production schedule, my drawing schedule. And yeah, and then I also tell him a little short story, a little anecdote about Mike Mignola and I commiserated over a chat right after my movie was canceled because he was having some bad luck with the Hellboy release that had just come out. Before it had actually been released, he had been scheduled or maybe even had meetings for the writer's room for the sequel. And then the movie came out and it didn't do well. And he was in a similar, like, man, there go all my plans, or a bunch of my plans, or I'm. And so we talked a little bit about that and having the rug pulled out from under you. And I told him, I think I'm going to take a lesson that I've always taken from you, which is the place where you have control is on your own pages. Like, I can't control this movie stuff. I have no say in it. I don't care about if we're going to get a change.org petition going, or we're going to call the head of Disney, or we're going to throw comic books on somebody's lawn to get them excited about, a Mouse Guard movie. Like, I don't have any real control over that happening, but I can control my art. I can keep putting out these stories. I still have the rights to do them. I can tell as many Mouse Guard stories as I want, and I have total control over the page. And Mike was like, well, thank you for that. And I think that both of us are probably better off with with a few scars or something like that. Like how this was a traumatic experience for us both. And he was like, I think we're both better off with a little bit of scars. So
I love it. David, I have one more. Well, that would have been a perfect place to end. But our good buddy J. Robert Deans has a good retailer question going back into the book stuff.
It's going to be about Square. Yeah.
Yeah, you know it. Did the 8x8 form factor cause you trouble early on with retailers not wanting to try the book simply because it didn't fit the rack?
It could have. Luckily, I'll just go back to, we'll just go to a pretty picture. It could have gone really badly for me. I think I was too dumb to know, and that it could have really been a problem. And I think Mark Smiley at Archaea was just willing to, if he was smart enough to know, he was willing to roll the dice on it. We did have retailers who had a really hard time when that book came in. I mean, it was in the solicitation. We did make sure that it was in the solicitation. It described the size of the book. But when it came out, these retailers go, crap, where do I put this? Because even on those kind of cascading shelves, some of them have vertical dividers that are the exact width of a comic, and Mouse Guard won't fit in there. But if they don't have those, and it's just a whole shelf long slot, by the time you put a Mouse Guard book in, the issue in front of it's covering up the title. It sits too low. So a lot of retailers put them up at the counter, like on some kind of an easel or other display stand. And it worked out really well for us. But I can't take any credit for planning it that way. It was a weird risk and a gamble. I like the format. I know a lot of people have told me how much they like the format, and that actually was a way to remove their kind of mental barrier of it being a comic. If they were averse to reading comics, like, oh, I don't read comics. Somebody handed them a Mouse Guard book and they're like, well, this is cool. This is cute. This is like a children's book. I like children's books, or I like picture books. And it took away that mystery of a comic for them. And so it worked for that. I've had retailers tell me that I definitely should change it to traditional. I've had at the 10-year anniversary of Mouse Guard in Baltimore, I had a retailer insist that I should be doing it the other way. I tried to kind of gently say, nah, no, thank you. And he's like, I'm a retailer. And I can guarantee you would have more sales if you switched over to traditional format at this point. And I pointed, we had the Baltimore yearbook was Mouse Guard that year, and it said celebrating 10 years. And I pointed at that and I went, I'm doing okay.
I love it. That'll be a perfect place to stop, because I know you, David Petersen, you have to pee. I bet you dollars of donuts. Guys, this has been a fantastic episode. We went a little long, but I think it was well worth it. David, I think we need to have you back. We could do another part of this. What do you
Let
think?
me know. Let me know when you're ready.
All right. Thank you. And we're going to end on this. Our good buddy, the Spyro fan, says, David, I love your books. You're an amazing artist. And I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mike, any last words?
I just wanted to say that I think that the format thing is probably not really that important now, because there's so many different kinds of books out there in the world. And I mean, when you're ordering it in a library or you're ordering it, in a bookstore, nobody in the bookstore goes, hey, wait a minute.
Right.
It's got to be a specific size. So
I can even attest to, I know that there are other comic creators out there that ended up getting Square books past their publishers because they were able to point at Mouse Guard and say, well, Mouse Guard does it. And the publisher went, oh, okay. Yeah, we can do your book, Square.
Nice.
I love it. All right. Well, we gave everybody the math. David, is there any place else online where people can follow you or you want to point them to before we get out of here?
I stream on Twitch every Monday and Wednesday from 4 p.m. till 8 p.m. Eastern. I'm Mouse Guard on Twitch, so I think I'm David Petersen on Twitch. Twitch.tv/David Petersen. Mouseguard.net's going to take you to, that's a hub. I mean, it's the Mouse Guard page, but you can get to my blog. I do a weekly blog with process breakdowns of pieces that I've done or behind the scenes info. I have an online store that you can link to from there. I have all the socials that you can get to from there. So yeah.
And you open up a rare commission window right now, right?
I did. I don't do commissions throughout the year very much. And I figured I should open a narrow window before the end of the year in case people want things for the holidays. So you can order those through my online store and watch me draw them on Twitch.
I love it. All right, guys, we're going to go home. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mike. Thank you triple much to David Petersen. You were a fantastic guest.
Thank you.
You know what? Good things come to those who wait. I think it all worked out.
It was great.
This is fantastic. And David, you've watched the show. You're a pencileer. You know how we end things around here.
I do.
Oh, guys, just to let you know, we're not going to be on next week. Isn't that right, Mike?
Right, yeah. We're taking a week off. We're back on the 30th.
I killed it. I killed the show.
Yeah, you murdered the show.
We got to lay in a warren and lick our wounds.
Mike, do you want to tell people who our guest is on the 30th?
Our next guest will be Joe Linsner.
Oh, interesting. I love it. Murderer's Row of cartoonists.
We're off for 2 weeks, and then we're back on the 30th, I believe.
Yeah, because also the 23rd is kind of like Thanksgiving-y.
Yep.
And,
Right.
I'm sure
And we'll all have the itis, and we can't do the podcast.
yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We'll see you back on the 30th. Please go follow David. Please go follow Steve, Mike, myself. You know what to do. But also, don't forget, we're still in a pandemic. So go ahead, David. Let's do it. Don't forget to wash those curvy hands. What was the name of your crew? The Power Brokers? What were you guys?
Plot Masters.
Plot Masters. Plot Masters.
I don't think we ever did this when we were the Plot Masters, but okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Good night, everyone.